Let's talk now about the governing structure of the Gilded Age city. It is not like our cities today. Um, and it was the same kind of heroic era as we've discussed pertaining in the large and growing businesses of that time. The same impulse uh, impelled the government of the Gilded Age city that impelled big business. It was to organize activity and to control that activity for profit. And the same historical judgments apply to both. We're talking about machine politics here. And let's talk about how uh, city, state, potentially national machine politics worked in the Gilded Age and in the immediate progressive era after the Gilded Age, in which many of these same things pertained. Um, Machines worked by dividing cities into districts, wards, and precincts. The district was a large section, a ward was a medium-sized section, subdivision of a district, and then precincts were subdivisions of wards. Each one of these distinct divisions had some kind of boss who was beholden finally to the citywide boss. And you can extrapolate this to states and even to the nation. It's something of a pyramid scheme, you might say. What the political machines did, and the reason for that they were able to exist, was that there was no other public way to get welfare or jobs to the citizens. That's the bread and butter of the political machine, was that it provided jobs and welfare to private citizens in periods of need, and all it asked in exchange was votes. It also asked that people turn a blind eye to graft and corruption. But graft and corruption was substantially operated at a more common level than it does now. We've passed through a century in which we've tried to root out graft and corruption, but it was winked at more thoroughly than we wink at it now. State legislatures were corrupt during periods in which you had no general incorporation laws. In order to get a business incorporated, you had to go and pay state legislators bribes. Bribery was very common, and looting public treasuries in sweetheart deals was very common as well. These kinds of, I'm not excusing it, I'm just saying that it was common, much more common than it is today. We prosecute this stuff. It took great amounts of graft before someone would find themselves being prosecuted by prosecutors, by other districts that had just had enough of it. So corruption and graft was part of the political machine system. The bosses, the ward healers, the precinct chairman were people that you could go to if you had a problem, and they could help you fix it. If you had someone coming in from out of town who needed a job, they could help that person find a job. But you were expected to turn a blind eye to graft and corruption and to continue to vote for those people who got you a job, who got you medical care, who got your family a food basket when you needed it. Political bosses ran this whole thing, and they weren't limited to any one party. I have three bosses listed here. They span the entire era that we're talking about. The most notorious and probably the definer of political bossism for the entire 19th and 20th century is William Tweed of Tammany Hall, New York City, who was the boss of New York from the 1850s to 1871. he merged the mayor's office, the Tammany Hall Fraternal Organization, and the New York City Democratic Party into a single ring called the Tweed Ring that grafted between 1865 and 1871, when it was finally shut down, somewhere between $30 and $200 million from the New York City Treasury in sweetheart deals and double payments and kickbacks and all of this kind of stuff. The sheer amount of graft is what brought the Tweed Ring down. The 1860s and 70s were an era of runaway graft, but Tweed was so obvious and so outrageous about it that it finally brought him down. He was prosecuted and sent to prison. George Cox, a Republican of Cincinnati, controlled Cincinnati for the years between 1880 and 1912, and through 2,000 patronage jobs, this is an estimate in 1900, he controlled 25,000 votes, and these could either set up someone in a city. These votes could be used to elect his friends. These votes could be used to elect governors, to elect House of Representatives members, and even to parlay into power at the national level. Cox was not particularly corrupt. He was just a political boss. And in fact, except for his political enemies, I don't think that anyone ever really accused him of gaining personally. What Cox was interested in was power. Probably the most, the person who got closest to creating a nationwide political ring and becoming a national political boss was the Senator Mark Hanna. He ran the Ohio GOP. He managed McKinley's 1896 campaign, and he was a senator from 1897 until 1904, and an advisor to both party and presidents. He controlled patronage that controlled votes at the national level. Now, bossism, particularly Boss Tweed, was a ripe field for political cartoonists. And Thomas Nast is the most famous political cartoonist of the era. Now, you know, we're talking about the 1860s and 1870s here, but I'll give you a second, and we'll talk a little more modern here. We're a little outside of our period, but these things have long legs, and they don't start at a particular time and end at a particular time that's convenient for us as historians to package. So go with me on this. This is a Thomas Nast cartoon, and I'm sure you've seen Nast cartoons before, even if you didn't realize it, that talks about Boss Tweed, who's the fat guy to the left, and passing the buck, quite literally, about who stole the people's money. And all of these guys in this ring, the Tweed ring, are saying it wasn't me, it was the other guy. That irritated a lot of people and surely made a lot of great political cartoon fodder for Thomas Nast. Well, let's look at another political cartoon and show you the long legs of political machines. We talk about having political machines today, but they're vastly different, of a different type, even if they do exist, than the machines that pertain from 1860 until right after Americans' involvement with World War II. You're looking at a cartoon here by a guy named Ray from the 1940s talking about the Tom Pendergast machine in Kansas City. And the most famous beneficiary, the most famous member of the Pendergast machine is President Harry S. Truman, who got his start in politics as a member of Tom Pendergast's machine in the 1920s. Pendergast kept Kansas City employed, mostly through make-work jobs during the Great Depression, and he was well loved until he just had ruled for too long. 20 years is about max for a political boss. Anyway, I wanted to show you that this stretched from Tweed to Pendergast, and thus we have how cities tended to be governed in the Gilded Age. Thank you for your attention.